Welcome back to the program, Psycho Fans. I know what you're saying. Chris, where in the hell have you been? Busy. I've been busy. What do I tell you every time? I say, listen, I got other jobs. I'm not one of these YouTubers that does it full time, so sometimes things hit the fan. I've been traveling, I've been different states, in cars, on planes, going to basketball games, tournament games, NCAA games. It's just been crazy. Work's been slamming me, so I think I'm coming out of the fog. So we should get rolling again. Okay, here is the big story on the M1A2. And like I said, when I put out the video asking for some guesses on what I drove, a couple of you did get it right and said an M1A2 tank. Yeah, so here is the story kind of from start to finish. And I'm going on recollection here, okay? This happened over 20 years ago. So my memory is not as good as it used to be. So I'll try to remember all the facts as best as I can. If I slip up somewhere and give like a detail on a part of the tank or something that some military guy out there knows it's not the case, then go ahead and correct me in the comments below. But here's sort of the backdrop to this. This probably happened in 1998 or so. So I would have been about 23, 24, somewhere in there. I think I was right out of college. And I have a sister who was married, had a kid. They were a military family, so my brother-in-law was a member of the U.S. Army Armored Division, and he'd been stationed all around the country, and they'd moved around. He'd been to Saudi Arabia during the Gulf and all that stuff, Gulf War. And so they finally got stationed in Fort Knox, Kentucky, which is semi-close to where I am. And so my mother and I decided, okay, we'll make a short road trip. We'll go down there and see the family. And in talking with my brother-in-law and my sisters, when we were making plans for this, he said, listen, come down. I think I can get you in a tank. We'll go have some fun. And I'm like, okay. I mean, are you allowed to do that? I mean, I don't know. He's like, yeah, I think I can talk to my commander or whoever it is, and I think we're good to go. I'm one of his best, pupils, so to speak. He's in the Armor Division. My brother-in-law, he drove a tank, so he was really good at it, and so they had a real good rapport. He said, I think I can get you. I think I can get you in. So we go down there. Sure enough, it happens, and we go out to this big complex where there's like, I don't know, 50 tanks in a row, kind of sitting in a big parking lot, and we go to town. I mean, it's really the most ridiculous thing when you think about it, because this was pre 9/11, so there's absolutely no way anything like this could happen now, with the restrictions and all that stuff. I mean, it's somebody, just an average civilian. If somebody in the military said, yeah, I'm going to take my friend out and just show him everything, how to run an M1A2 tank this afternoon, people would be having military tribunals. They would be thrown in the stockade. Civilians would be going to prison. You just don't do that now. But back then, it was kind of just a different time. And it just so happened that my brother-in-law had a really good rapport with his commanders at the base. And they made it happen. So he got the keys to one of the tanks, and we went out there, and we spent all day in it. Now, it's kind of intimidating at first because these things are huge. They're like 70, 75 tons, and you're nervous. You don't want to. The last thing you want to do is just screw something up. I don't want to make my life miserable for my brother-in-law. But, even more so than that, I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to be thrown in prison here. So for the first couple hours, we basically just kind of go over the inner workings of the tank and stuff. And I guess the biggest takeaway from like that first 10 minutes of being in the tank was just how loud it was. You have to wear headphones in order to hear yourself. I mean, once you get in the tank in the little turret area, there's room for like 4 people, 3 or 4 people. And I mean, you know, you're sort of sardined in there, so there's not a lot of room in there. So you're literally right next to the person, but there's no way you could hear them over the engine if you don't have your headphones on, because basically these things are running, it's like a 1,500 horsepower turbine engine in the back, and it's mostly just like a helicopter engine they stuck in this thing, and it just winds up like a turbine, like a jet engine, and it probably takes a good 10 minutes for this thing to just start, you know, churning up and getting to running temperature, and it just gets louder and louder. So that was really the first thing that I took away is, Jesus, this thing is loud. And it's just, you know, everything just reverberates even more on the inside. So we basically got in this thing and we sort of went over all the work and how everything worked. And I mean, it was, you talk about a kid in a candy store, man. I mean, this is like, I mean, you could play video games all you want, but it's just different actually being in there. First you drop down the little, I don't know, like turret hole. So you slide down into this thing, and I think in the turret area there's like room for 3 people. There's a tank commander, a gunner, and a loader. And then up front in the front of the tank, that's where the driver is. And there's like a little tube sort of area you can slide down within the tank and go underneath and get to the front of the tank and drive the tank. We'll get to that in a minute. So kind of the first things we did were just the basic operational procedures of the tank and how it, you know, just how you start it up, you know, the basic systems that are involved, you know what responsibilities each person has, whether it's the gunner or the commander or the loader. So we kind of went through all those responsibilities one by one. I sort of play acted each one to, you know, to get an idea of how they worked. And so the maybe the most interesting part about it was just the whole, not just the process of everybody's responsibility within the tank, but how they sort of interacted and worked together as a team. So everybody's got to be on the same page at the same time because the quarters are just so cramped. So if somebody is, you know, not on the same page, it screws everybody else up. And so basically, to get to the fun stuff, the part of like shooting this thing and moving the turret and all that stuff, we did all that. I did all that. Moving the turret around, we used it's got like thermal imaging, it's got like laser imaging. So we like locked on to targets and stuff with the like range finders and stuff. And so we would just like lock onto trees and see how it worked. And then we could, you know, I used the thermal imaging camera and stuff to turn that on to see how that worked. And I went through, he sort of gave me like, you know, potential like operational scenarios where like, oh, okay, you would need to use it in this situation. Or if there's somebody drops smoke bombs or something and you can't use, you know, certain imaging, you use another one as a backup. So we went through all that, went through the movement of the turret and everything. That was really fun. And then we started actually, you know, the tank's got a 120 millimeter cannon on this thing, and it's huge. And sort of the back end of this turret part of the cannon, kind of the bore, the breech where you put the shells in, I mean, it takes up a big chunk of space in the small cabin area in the turret. And so when you shoot a round, and let me preface this by saying I did not shoot a round, but I did load a round. We'll get to that in a second. When this thing shoots, it's going to kick back. And he said, you know, there have been many military people within tanks that have been in the wrong place at the wrong time inside that tank, have gotten hit with the recoil and have, you know, broken shoulders, broken bones, cracked heads. It's been really ugly. So again, everybody's got to be on the same page, doing what they're supposed to be doing. So here's one of the most interesting things about the tank. And you don't really think about this, and you probably wouldn't know it unless you're actually in there. And I actually did it, and I can see how dangerous it could be. The loader really has a huge responsibility in this. So what the loader does is he sits on like a, actually let me me grab this stool. He sits on like a stool like this. And let's say, for instance, the tank, this is the back of the tank, that's the front of the tank, okay? And so the driver's up here. In the back here, the engine's in the back and all that stuff. So the turret's facing this way if we're going straight forward. So if the loader sits kind of in the back of the main turret area. So you've got kind of like here's the sort of the breech where the turret is, where you'd put shells in. Then you kind of got a place for one guy here and a place for the other guy here. So he sits kind of in the back of this thing. And he sits against a big wall right here. And this is sort of a reinforced blast wall with a blast door in it. And the engine is in the very, very back. And then here's where all the live shells are stored, okay? So they're behind this blast door. In case they went off or something like that, the blast would sort of go that way. Not sure it would save them or not, but the doors are anyways. But here's the thing. In order to get to the shells, these shells are huge. They're probably about like that big, okay? And they weigh, God, man, they were heavy. They were like, I'm guessing 40 pounds, maybe more. I don't know, but they were heavy. This is a two-handed job we're dealing with here. So what it's got is, it's got like a little lever here. Here's the sort of a big wall right here. And then the blast door is like about right here. And it's an automatic door. And it goes shung, shung, and it opens up like that. And so you've got a little lever here right next to your knee that's against the wall. And if you lean your knee against it, your thigh against it, it triggers the door, and the door automatically slides open like this. So it's like shung, and as long as you keep that little plate here, that little lever depressed with your knee, the door will stay open. As soon as you let it go, it'll automatically slam shut. And when it slams shut, it's not stopping for anything. And he was telling me, you get your hand in there, you get fingers, many fingers have been chopped off with this thing. And it's a heavy door. This is like a reinforced, who knows, depleted uranium door here. Probably weighs 2 tons or something like that. So it slams shut automatically. So you lean your knee against this thing, the door slides open, and now you got access to all the shells. Now, if I remember right, while you got your knee against it and the door's open, you have to grab the shells and load them while you still keep your knee depressed. Now, if you're trying to grab a shell and you're pulling it out and you accidentally let off that lever and the door starts to shut while you're pulling, big trouble, big trouble. So you keep your knee against it, the door stays open, and you grab the shell. And if I remember, the shells are stacked backwards, okay? So the back of the shell is here, sort of would be like the primer area, and the front of the shell is over there. And the reason for that is, even though I got to put the shell in this way and shoot that way, is the quarters are so cramped in this thing, you couldn't just grab a shell like this and then put it in. There's just no space for it. So what you've got to do is you've got to take the shell that's backwards, and it's done this for a reason, because it's the only way you can get it in the breech. You take the shell, you pull it out like this, and you dip it down like this. So the bottom of the shell down here, and then you twist it and shove it in like that. So it's a sort of a 2-step motion. You pull the shell down between your legs, and then back up and in. And that's the only way you can get the shells in, because there's just not enough room inside the tank. And so that's one step you have to do. You have to be really careful of. The second step is actually putting the shell in the turret, in the breech area of this 120 millimeter cannon. So where you insert it, there's like the hole is probably about like that big where you're putting the shell into. And you got to push the shell in, and then at the back of the breech, once it recognizes the shell is fully in, it closes up automatically. It just goes ching. There's like a big steel thing that just closes this thing tight up. And so when you shove this shell in, if you don't get your hand out right away, this thing's going to come up and take your hand completely off. And he said there's plenty of people that have had serious hand injuries from not getting their hand out of the way for doing that. So that's why a lot of people don't like to be loaders. So one way to I remember him telling me, distinctly, one way that they taught you to do this, to try to mitigate the risks, is when you're shoving the shell in, don't leave your fingers exposed. Keep them like this and shove it with the palm of your hand in like that. And then you push in and go up like that, so you get your hand out of the way, so when this thing comes up, it doesn't take your hand off. And you have to shove this thing in really hard. So, and again, this is like a 40 or 50 pound shell or something. They're huge. And so you dip it down, you make sure the door doesn't close, you get it down here, then you can lift your knee off the lever so the door will shut, the blast door shut. You lift back up, you shove it in, you push it up, you get your fingers out of the way, this thing closes up, and you can shoot. And I think he said they try to be able to shoot one round every, I don't know, I forget what it was. It was super fast, like 15, 20 seconds, something like that. It was amazing. So, you know, it's chaos in there during a time of war when all this stuff's going on. So that was pretty interesting. And then you've got the, I think on the right side, this is where a lot of the computer equipment is and the screens and sort of, it's got all the mappings and stuff where it tells you like where other tanks are that are around you, so you can kind of communicate with them and not, and kind of in real time where the tanks sort of communicate with one another, kind of GPS sort of a deal, so you don't have to do it manually. And that's where some of the thermal imaging cameras and stuff are, where the gunner would sit. So he's got these like, he kind of looks into like a periscope sort of thing, and he looks in, and that's where he aims the turret and stuff. And so when you move the turret around, obviously you don't really feel it. I mean, you feel a little bit, but you're moving with the turret. So you're always, everything in the middle is sort of moving together. So you kind of lose your sense of directions in terms of where the front and the back of the tank are, because everything in the middle is always working together. So when you lock onto a target, you can lock on, and then no matter how the tank's moving around, that target always stays fixed. So we would like point it on a tree, and no matter how we would move the tank, we were always pinpointed on the tree. So once you fix in on a target, you're good to go and you can shoot. So that was pretty cool. So we did everything up to to shooting a shell. I can't even believe someone would even let somebody like me load a frickin' shell in a tank. I mean, it's just so absurd how this happened. And I'm leaving names out of this so nobody gets in trouble now. Like I said, it happened 20, 25 years ago, so it's kind of it's pointless now. The person's out, I think everybody's safe, but it kind of just shows you what a different time it was. So another thing, in order to drive this thing, there's two ways to get in and drive it. There's kind of like a little hatch at the front of the tank, and I think in one of the pictures I'll show up here, where I'm sitting in the driver's seat. You can get in there. That's kind of more of a casual, easier way to get in. Or if the entire tank is sealed up, if you're in the turret area, I think down in the bottom right there's like this little passageway, and you got to kind of put your feet in first, and there's kind of like little grab bars, and you just slide all the way underneath into this little seat that practically sits on the floor where you drive this thing. And that's once you get there, you don't have to have that lid open on that little hatch open on top, and you can drive it with the tank completely sealed. So you can get into that way as well. But there's really only one way into the driver's area and one way out if the tank, is sealed up. And he was telling me, a lot of people don't like to be drivers and stuff because if they're like something happens with the tank or something like that, or the hatch won't open right or something, you've got to crawl all the way back out through that little tunnel area. And if there's a problem there, you're kind of stuck in there. So, kind of good and bad with that. But anyways, in terms of driving it, a couple of things I remember. Number one, you basically drive it like a motorcycle. There's no steering wheel. It's like got two handlebars here. And I think if I remember right, I think and the way you like put it in gear, it's got like this little selector in the middle where it's got like, just like a car, like reverse, drive, low, high, whatever it is. And you kind of just move this thing. It's an automatic transmission, so you don't do any shifting or anything like that. And I think the throttle is like motorcycle style. Now, the one thing I really remember, and probably more than anything really, were the brakes. The brakes on these things are just like a car brake, you know, you do it with your feet. But you have got to put so much pressure on the brake in order to get this thing to stop. It's unbelievable. I mean, so we were parking this thing. Okay, we're done. I got to line it back up with all these tanks, right? And so there's a row of 50, and we got to put it back to where we got it from. So I'm trying to get it exactly, you know, it's got to be 6 feet from this side of the tank, 6 feet from the next side of the tank. So I'm getting in the middle. It's got to be exact row, so it's like, you know, it looks perfect, military style. And so he goes, okay, I'm going to get out. I'm going to, you know, wave you and move you and all this stuff. So he gets out of the tank, my brother-in-law. So it's just me. I'm riding solo shotgun here, driving this tank. And I got the hatch open, so I'm looking out over the hatch. So I'm not sealed up or anything. So I got a good view of what's in front of me. And so he's standing in front, sort of like, you know, tarmac style, waving me in, you know, telling me to come forward, and he's, you know, he's telling me I'm getting closer. And I'm like, okay, and I'm getting closer. And I figure I'm just gonna like hit the brakes, you know, and I'll come to a stop. The damn thing's not stopping. It is not stopping. I'm thinking, I'm gonna run my brother-in-law over with a freaking tank. I'm gonna be on the news, buddy. This is not good. His family's not gonna like me. My sister's not gonna like me. This is bad news. And so I remember distinctly, I had to put both feet on the brake and just crush it with everything I had in order to get this thing to stop. And finally, it must have had, I don't know, hydraulic pressure, whatever it is in the brakes in order to stop it. And it came to a stop. And when it stops, you know, with those big tracks on it, and we were on pavement, when you hit stop, the thing stops literally like on a dime. And so I was able to stop it in time, but he was literally standing like 3 feet in front of the tank. And he kind of just looked at me, and I looked at him as like, there's nothing, what can you say? I mean, what can you say? This could have really been bad. So that was pretty hairy. That was pretty much the end of it at that point. But it was an unbelievable experience. Like I said, it was really an all-day affair. We spent several hours just him teaching me how everything worked. I mean, literally by the end of the day, if I had the keys to one of these things, I could have jumped in it and driven it down the highway, like you see on TV with the people. It's, you know, that guy like 20 years ago that stole a tank and drove it down the highway and was driving across berms and medians and stuff like that, crushing cars. That literally could have been me. I had enough knowledge at that time, after a full day of this, in order to drive it, in order to use thermal imaging, in order to move the turret, load shells, and pretty much do everything except fire it. And that's the easy part, really, once you do all the other stuff. So just an interesting experience. You know, it's one of those things, like I said in the video building up to this, everybody talks about cool stuff that they've done or cool cars that they've, you know, driven or ridden in, or motorcycles or anything like that. I always bring this up because this is sort of the thing that really nobody else can top. I mean, other things are cool. Yeah, you can drive a Koeniggsegg, it's faster. You know, those are several $1 million too. But this is the kind of thing where you have to know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, and they have to have just the right relationship. And this has to have happened at just the right time in order for this to have happened. And not only that, it can never happen again. There's no way post 9/11 that anything like this is going to happen unless you were like, you know, a 60 Minutes journalist or something like that. But even then, the security is so tight around this stuff anymore. They don't want you around this stuff. They don't want you near it. And never mind, they don't, you know, not that they don't even want you near it, they're not going to tell you how it works. And so I came away from that weekend thinking, man, that was an experience. That's something I'm never going to forget, and that's something that very few people ever had an opportunity to do. So that's sort of the story, start to finish. Like I said, it happened probably 20 or 25 years ago. My brother-in-law is no longer my brother-in-law anymore. He's no longer in the military anymore. A lot of things have changed since then, not just post 9/11, but relationships and families and all that stuff. So not likely to ever happen again for me or for anybody else. So there you go. If you enjoyed this video, if you like this story, what the hell? Give me a thumbs up. You didn't like it, don't like it. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at ChrisWorldTV. And if you haven't subscribed already, subscribe today so you never miss an episode. Take care.